Anybody who thinks they're not going to get busted is a fucking idiot.
Welcome to the Bonafide podcast with Luke Bona. And he's not.
All right, here we go.
Done.
Hold your ears, folks.
Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about, and thank you for getting back to me. I hope you've been well.
Yeah, no, I've been really well, thanks.
Last time you and I spoke, we spoke for quite some time about your very, very colourful past and your father.
Yeah.
Your time both overseas and here in Australia. We talked about you being arrested for selling and dealing with drugs and going to jail. And you said, look, I've got some stories to tell you about what life was like back then in a women's jail. And you said, well, we could save that story for another day. Well, that other day has arrived. So thank you so much.
Not a problem at all. Anything to get the story of female jails in Australia out.
What year was it you were arrested and sent to jail? We're talking about Conlon. Explain Conlon.
Okay, so I was arrested on June 8th, 1991, and I got out on December 8th, 1993. Conlon is basically the first stop on your trip through the system. So I think it's still named Conlon today, even though the name of the jail is not Mullewa anymore. The name of the jail is now just Silverwater Complex, right? Mm-hmm. So when I was in, it was Silverwater was the men's and Mullewa was the women's. And your first step on the road to hell was Conlon, where everybody went, whether you were a murderer, whether you sold drugs, or whether you were just a hooker on the street who was in for a 2-month warrant. It didn't matter.
And the way you were processed was very, very interesting. Take us through that.
I was busted on a long weekend. Of course I was.
Yeah.
So therefore I was in the SPC cells from the Saturday until the Tuesday. Under normal circumstances, if you were busted on the Monday, they'd put you a bail hearing on the Tuesday morning and then you'd be out at Mullewa or wherever if you were a male the following day. They don't like to keep you in the SPC, you know what I mean, the turnover. But because it was a long weekend, none of that was going on. So I had to wait till the Tuesday to get out there. By that time, it was known that my father was who my father was.
Gordon Piper.
Yeah, by the police telling the screws. Obviously, I've thought about it over the years and I'm thinking, how would they even know when I've been in jail, when I've been in cells? And then I realised it was the cops that told them. But because Dad had contacted them.
Gordon Piper was one of Australia's most recognised actors. He was on a country practice. He played the plumber Bob Hatfield and was extremely recognisable and a household name.
Yes, he was. Yes, he had. But people now, it's funny how as time goes on, I'll say, oh, yeah, my father was Bob Hatfield on a country practice. And if you talk about it to somebody, say under the age of 40, they're like, what, who? Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny how times change. But, you know, it's still streaming on 7+, so somebody has to be watching it still. So they just take you in. They strip search you, whatever stuff you have with you, they take away and they list it all. Well, because of the way I was busted, I didn't have anything with me anyway. You know what I mean? I had me. I don't even think I had a purse or anything. I can't remember me having a purse or anything, because what happened was 5 weeks later, I was doing that. I was working up in reception, which was a trusty job. But because of who my father was, you usually got that job after about 5 years. I got it after 5 weeks because of who my father was, and they wanted me to shut up. They didn't want me to be contacting anybody. So they gave me that job. So I don't even remember me having any bags or anything in reception because we used to hold everything. And that was it. And then they took you down to Conlon, middle of the night usually. It was never the middle of the day. It was always, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night.
And look, because of the chat we had last time, you Did you think that being busted, arrested and sent to prison was inevitable? Or were you at that point where you thought, gee, this drug caper is going smoothly, I'm bulletproof? Or were you surprised?
No. Any drug dealer, now look what just happened in Mexico to the leader of the cartel. Any drug dealer who thinks he is infallible is living in some sort of heaven-sent insanity, because I was a street dealer, I was a dance party drug dealer. I wasn't dealing heroin. I wasn't out there. I was out there every day, but I was in pubs and I was just not, you know what I mean? It was a gay dance party drug scene.
You weren't standing outside schools or soliciting underage kids.
I wasn't standing outside schools. That's what I said to the judge. I wasn't dealing heroin to anybody under the age of 18. I wasn't dealing heroin at all. It wasn't my drug. My drugs were ketamine, which I was the first person to ever be busted with in Australia, and also ecstasy. So it was always around dance parties or weekends. They were my times, But I knew, and it was funny, one of my roommates about 10 days before, so it was winter and we had an open fire in West Street where I lived, and I was just standing near the fire, and Kevin said to me, don't you ever get scared about getting busted? And I said, no, I don't get scared, because anybody who thinks they're not going to get busted is a idiot. I mean, you're going to get busted. At some point, it's going to happen. I have no knowledge of any drug dealer that is still working today that was working in my day. Of my type, I don't know about heroin dealers or ice dealers or any of that shit. I don't know those kind of drugs. But anybody who is dealing, even coke, I don't know any coke dealers who are still dealing today. You're an idiot if you think you're going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're arrested on a long weekend. And for processing, you go to Conlon.
You go out to Mullewa, you go to Conlon the first
And
step.
then where?
Well, you're in Conlon. Okay, so Conlon is, as I said, it's a meeting place of everybody. Everybody goes there. Now, dependent on your charges is whether or not you're going to ever get out of Conlon or if you're going to be in Conlon for the whole time. Now, if you're on a 2-month warrant as a street hooker, which there aren't many of these days, but if you're on a 2-month warrant, and I see it because I live in the Cross, I see it all the time, with guys that are just probably homeless and they're getting busted by the cops. They're going out to Silverwater for their warrants because they stole something from some shop and them given bail and didn't turn up for the bail hearing and whatever, la, la, la. So there's those people that are there, and there's also murderers there. Dependent on your charge is dependent on how long you spend in Conlon. Now, with me, again, I was a totally different kettle of fish. I knew murderers who were in Conlon who were there for 6 months. Because of Dad, because I got the job in reception 5 weeks after I went in, right, the way that they changed the rules at the drop of the hat, I went straight to medium security. So they're wings that are kept really nice because the girls that are in there for life, or they're in there for 10 years, 12 years, 20 years, whatever. So the wings are really well kept. I was in with the girl who was the runner of the kitchen. I was in with other girls who ran the library.
You were sentenced to 3 years and 2 months.
No, I was sentenced to, in jail, 2.5 years. 3 years, 2 months, or 3 years, 8 months was I think it was 3 years, 2 months, was my top sentence, what's called a top sentence. And the bottom sentence is how long you do in jail, and I did 2.5 years in jail.
It's a long time for suddenly someone who's led such an extraordinary life, both here and overseas, and experiencing such a broad brand of life to suddenly be confined, it must have been a hell of a shock. But it's what you experienced in jail that prompted you to want to talk today, because life for a female prisoner, you were telling me off air, was a lot different to life for a male prisoner, and the system
it's always
set up to favour male prisoners more than female prisoners. But I just want to get back to something that you shared with me. Please tell me if I've got this wrong, but you talked about dealing with corrupt prison officers. You refer to them as screws.
Yeah.
How many of them
were corrupt?
Back in the day, were corrupt?
I would say probably 1 in 10. When I say corruption, I mean, for example, this is an example of the corruption. It was nothing like, letting people out of jail early or any of that crap. The corruption was female screws having affairs with female inmates. That happened all the time. But the most corrupt thing that they did personally to me and to the girls that I was in now when I went to minimum security, so we're out of Conlon, we're out of medium security, and we're in minimum security because I'd been sentenced. There was a girl, Pauline, she used to cook all cakes and everything for visits on Saturdays, right? And for the Starlight Foundation. And over the year, so when visitors walked in, they could buy cakes for the inmates who were going to visits. And over the year that we were doing it, we raised $6,000, right? When Pauline went to get the money to send the check or whatever to the Starlight Foundation, the money had gone, in inverted commas, missing.
Wow.
So there was no money for the Starlight Foundation, and Pauline said, that's it, no more. We're not doing it anymore. They've stolen the money. So that's something I know 100% happened, and the only people who had access. And screws, there was nobody else. So they figured, we're only inmates. Who are we going to complain to? And we'll just take the money. And so that $6,000 went missing. But, when I was also in minimum security, it doesn't happen so much it happened in medium, but not in Conlon. So Conlon's maximum. Then we were down in Brady, that was medium. And then out at Norma Parker in Parramatta, that was minimum. But in medium and in especially minimum, there was always somebody screwing with a screw.
What do you mean?
Well, just what I just said. Having relationships with inmates. And there was at least 2 that I know of, two couples, who ended up when the inmate got out, they became a couple.
Was this a male having a relationship with a female?
No, female.
A female having a sexual relationship with a female prisoner?
Yeah.
Because I remember you saying that you well, please correct me if I'm wrong. You said most of these screws were lesbians.
Yeah, most of them. Yeah, I would say, oh God, at least 85%, maybe more.
Why do you think the job attracts people of that persuasion?
I think because I always say this of screws. I would. There's only one screw that I wouldn't cross the road to either hit or run down with my car, right, that I knew. But I always think that they are wannabe cops and they couldn't make it. A lot of them are overweight, right? 50% of them are overweight, so they couldn't run if their life depended on it. Male screws that are in female jails are definitely the bottom of the barrel screws. Why are you a male in a female? What, you don't want to be in a male jail? You're too weak to put up with the men? What's your reasoning here? Because they have a choice. It's like, it's a government job. You can apply for it or not, so a job comes up at Mullewa and you're a male. What the hell are you doing? Why aren't you going to Long Bay? You know, they were really the weakest of the weak. But I didn't ever know, probably because the females weren't interested in it, but I didn't ever know of a female-male relationship at all the whole time I was out there.
I remember you telling me that there weren't many, if at all, services for most of the female inmates unless you were a junkie. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not services, medication.
Right. Explain that.
If you go in as a junkie, the thing that they want you on immediately is methadone. Some junkies aren't on methadone, you know. I remember doing a lockdown, meaning that something had happened in the jail. Don't know what, can't remember. And this is within the first 5 weeks because I still was in a cell with somebody else. After the 5 weeks, when I got my job in reception, I had my own cell because of the hours you worked. And I was in a lockdown, which means you're not allowed out of the cell, with a girl who had just come in. So this was in Conlon. And when you first come in, they ask you, are you a heroin addict? Are you on heroin?
Right.
What drugs are you on? Whatever, you know, normal, not like a doctor's thing, you know. And this girl didn't want to tell them that she was on heroin. Like, she didn't look like a junkie. And she didn't want to tell them that she was on heroin. So she said no. And then we went into a 3-day lockdown.
Yeah.
And she went through withdrawals in a cell, 8 by 10, with me in the cell. I'll never forget it. It was like,
what happened? I've never seen that. Describe it.
well, it's just like people like thinking that things are crawling out of their skin. They're in like racked in pain. They're in the fetal position for 3/4 of the day. They're crying. They're just in a lot of pain. You know what I mean? I don't know. I've never done heroin. I have no clue. But they're like, you know, cramped up, all that kind of stuff. Whereas if she would have been honest,
yeah,
even in lockdown, they would bring the methadone around to the people who were on methadone. Now, I went in there drinking 2 bottles of Stolies a day because I was doing the rounds of the pubs. So to deal my drugs. So, and I had a lot of the bartenders working for me. So every bartender would get me a double Stolies on the rocks with a splash of lime every pub I went into. And so I was up to, you know, 1.5 bottles, 2 bottles over a night, right? And which seems like a lot, but in those days, I mean, I was young and I could handle it, and I wasn't really drunk. I was just doing my job. But I was, in real terms, I was an alcoholic, and there is nothing for alcoholics. There's nothing for people who are on some sort of antidepressant. You don't get if somebody is like mentally ill and on an antidepressant, you have to go through a whole rigmarole of going to their nurse, seeing them before you can, unless you've got it in your bag when you go walk in, a whole rigmarole to get your medication. In that time, your mental illness could have gone down the toilet again, you know? Because the nurses were only out there for once a week. Whereas with men's jails, they're out there every day. Whereas with men's jails, there's a gym for them to work out in. They have exercises, you know what I mean? You know, they've got classes, do whatever. We had nothing. All money gone to men's jails, no money gone to female jails at all.
What about feminine products that women need that men don't?
Now, let me think. I think we had to buy those in buy-ups. I don't think, well, maybe they were supplied. Jesus, this is a long time ago, Luke. Maybe they were supplied, but if you wanted a particular product, you had $25 a week. If you had it in your bank, if you had somebody on the outside giving you money, then you buy the product that you wanted. But I think from memory that they had pads and tampons there. I'm pretty sure. I mean, health-wise,
You would think so. You would think so.
World Health Organization, I'm pretty bloody sure they'd have to. You know what I mean?
Because I remember you saying that female inmates were treated like 3-year-olds. What did you mean by that?
Because I always said if I ever write a book, like I do my story on TikTok under Kerrin, Kerrin 1954, I do it chronologically on TikTok, right? I mean, that's how you got onto me and how Gary Jubilant got onto me, but I would call it I'm Not 3 because they constantly treat you like a 3-year-old. Like you've got to be taught, like it's like Hofstrand, stand in the corner. Well, I was standing in the corner because that's where my cell is. Their derision of you, their putting down of you was constant. It was like this was what they took pleasure in, was pushing you down all the time, treating you like a child, telling you what to do at all times, even though you were doing it, even though you could have been like the star student of the jail in like whatever you were doing, you know, like me at reception, I'm doing such a great job. Still, I'm not doing a good job. Still, there's something I'm doing wrong. They just have to push you all the time. It's like they've got their finger on your back like this.
Yeah, so to wear you down. Is that to wear you down? And take away any self-esteem? Because you were saying that the authorities, the screws, were constantly telling you that you were going to reoffend.
100%. That's why the recidivism rate is so high in Australia versus in Norway, where they've just closed the last jail because there wasn't enough inmates to keep the jails open.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Whereas in Australia, they need to build more jails because there's more people going in. It's kind of like becoming like the United States where it's overcrowding. Because they keep telling you up to the day you walk out, oh, we'll see you again. You'll do it again. You know, you got nothing else in life. You'll do it again. And this is to people who weren't as strong as me, who didn't have the kind of life I had. So if you're talking to them, those kind of people, they go out, which are the junkies on the street, the hookers on the street, people who have done B&Es, break-and-enters, you know, people who are struggling in life in some way or another, they take that with them. And they do reoffend, you know.
How many of your fellow inmates do you think were under pressure and under a spell, if you will, or under threat from domineering males?
Oh, really and truly, I don't think that many.
Right.
Because it wasn't like what people think, you know, women in prison, they're all there because the guys told them to go out and deal with drugs. They have
a pimp. They're working for a pimp, they're getting paid in drugs, so they're hooked.
No.
I
wouldn't say that at all. Not with the girls I was in with, because I was in with a lot of murderers, so nobody tells a murderer what to do. I was in with one girl who you could say was probably under the spell of
influence
of a guy, but it wasn't really under his influence because she was a bikie chick. I've actually been in contact with her family who contacted me through TikTok. She's passed now. But she was a bikie chick, so she was like in the bikie scene.
Right.
And she actually shot her best friend because she meant to shoot somebody else, and the best friend jumped in front of the other person and was killed instead. So she kind of had regrets about that all the time she was in, but she just didn't settle for 8 years, and then she settled. But no, I can't, unless you're talking about the junkies in the street who, we don't have that kind of mentality here. There's not pimps walking around. The sex workers up here in the Cross, even in those days, weren't in some big, like, you know, house of 20 women, their reason for being on the street here was to support their heroin addiction, not because of some man saying, the only man they're talking about would be the man feeding him the heroin, but it could have been a woman feeding him heroin. It didn't matter, you know?
Yeah.
I really don't, I never saw that. That's a very Americanized way of thinking of things, because the Americans and the blacks and all of that kind of, you know, false narrative we get all the time, when if you look at today's politics, it's actually the rich white people that are doing that kind of thing, not the poor black people, you know? No, I really didn't see it. And if I did, they kept it from me because they knew that I would be like on them, like, you know, you're an idiot.
Yeah. Because you're a very, very strong woman.
I was, yeah.
Oh, I think you still are. But here's a question. Sexually, nothing shocks you, and we've covered that in our previous chat, that your very, very colourful life. Nothing shocks you, but were you at all harassed, or were you tried to be coerced into sexual favours for other favours? Did you ever feel...
No.
That you were compromised? I guess maybe not for you because you are so strong.
No. And I didn't, the girls that I was in with, again, I'm realising that I was only in Conlon for 5 weeks. That's where all that crap happens.
Right.
Like I saw a girl raped with a broomstick there.
Oh, Jesus.
Right? That's a totally different world. And, of course, there were no screws around to stop it. Of course not, because God forbid that they would be around. And God forbid there'd be CCTV down in that area. Not where I was, because where I was where our home was. It was a wing called Brady West, right? There was Brady East, Brady West. Then there was another 2 down the hill, and somebody on TikTok told me what it was named, and I can't remember what it was named now again. But they were real homes. They were like really nice. And if a girl wanted to be with a girl, they were together in the wing. We had like 2 or 3 relationships going on in the wing, but they were consensual relationships. Nobody was forcing anybody to do anything, you know?
Were you ever in fear of your life? Were you... Because it's a very scary place, and if you're surrounded, if the only form of protection around you is corrupt, did you ever feel compromised? Were you ever scared?
I was extremely scared when I first went in because I didn't know what I was coming into, and somebody asked me again on TikTok. Somebody asked me what was like the first day like and what was the last day like, kind of thing. And my first fear of jail was knowledge. I didn't know how long I was going to be there. And that fear stayed with me for 13 months until I was sentenced. I didn't fear anything around me because the first day I came out of that cell, so I'd come in 7 or 8 o'clock at night, so everybody was in their cells. And I came down I was at the end of the block on the left, so I had to walk past all these cells. And whenever anybody comes in, it is like, you know, you see in the American jails, only in our jails you've only got a window. You don't have the full cell thing there in jails like SPC. Yeah. I could see people's heads looking at who the new inmate was. And so I thought at that time, I stayed awake most of that night, and I thought at that time, I'm going to make this my own. This is on my terms. And so the next morning when we're unlocked, everybody goes out into the main muster area. And I walked up to everybody and I said, "Hi, my name's Kerrin. What's your name?" And I just shook everybody's hand.
Yes.
Because I wanted them to know that I wasn't scared of them. I was not, you know, I'm 6 foot tall. I'm a pretty robust person. So it's not like I'm some little weak human being. And then after a week, they found out who my father was.
Yes.
Because he came out for visits, and then the whole attitude of everybody changed. Then it was like, because everybody out in jail was in those days a country practice.
Tell us about when your dad did come and visit, Gordon Piper, Bob Hatfield from a country practice. What happened when he came to visit?
Well, whenever he came to visit, I would know, right? Like, because you can only have one visit a week, right, on the Wednesday and Saturday. So 2 visits a week, but you can't have a whole crowd of people come out. So Dad had put down to come out on a Saturday, and then the one phone call I'd get, one week I'd contact Nan, the next week I'd contact Dad, whatever it was. I knew with my father it had to be kept secret as it could be, right? Although that didn't work very well, but it worked well in the media, but it didn't work well in the jail. So whenever Dad came out, I would always say to the girls in the wing, "Oh, Dad's coming out on Saturday." And through the jail would go the whisper of Kerrin's father's coming out.
Yes.
So everybody who could get a visit, especially the junkies, everybody who could get a visit would get a visit on the day that Dad was coming out, because the screws were so enamored with my father being who he was, that we were on like picnic benches, you know, like not small ones, but long ones. And you weren't allowed to kiss the person or anything like that. There was no physical contact. But all the screws, like they'd wait for a certain amount of time, all the screws would slowly walk up to our area, up to where Dad and I were sitting, wherever that was. And then all of a sudden, all of these other girls would be kissing their friends, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then it'd be like, oh, you know, no kissing, da, 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 da. Then you go back down into the wing, and in each wing, I mean, I know only from my personal experience in my wing, when I was in Conlon, the vomiting and the number 2s were being done because they were getting up or down what they'd put in their body.
Really?
Yeah. But it was all because the screws were too enamored with my father. It was their own fault that there was stuff going around.
Wow. So your original sentence, 3 years and 2 months, but it was less. You got out in less than that. 2.5 years. You always get a parole. So 3 years, 2 months is what is called the top sentence. Yes.
And then the bottom sentence is what you do in jail.
You have been an advocate for better conditions for women in prison.
Yep.
And you've achieved a lot of that. Are you proud of that? You should be.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I've put out the knowledge. The woman who probably did the most for changes in women in prison is a woman that years and years ago I did an interview with. Okay, so there's a guy named John Birmingham who wrote, he died with a falafel in his hand.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So his girlfriend was a girl that I worked with when I was doing works release. I ended up working for them as well at Corrective Services Industries in Regent's Park. And Heather was their marketing manager. Her boyfriend was John Birmingham at the time. And when I got out, I did an interview with John, and he, on the same interview, interviewed a woman named Blanche Hampton, who wrote a book called Women in Prison. And it was a really interesting book. So she's the one who initiated some changes. I then just rode her coattail and tried to do as much as I could. And then I used to write out the blueies, which were the complaint forms and the request for appeals, etc., for the girls who weren't eloquent enough to write couldn't write, one of the two. So I got 2 girls out on appeal that way. That was my shining hour, those 2. And just small things. But Blanche Hampton was the one who really started the gravy train for the girls who train running.
Well, things have certainly changed since then. But just going back, we discussed this in our previous chat. So please, listeners, go back to the first chat I had with Kerrin, which was last year. But your dad was wrongly accused of sexual abuse
assault.
crimes.
Yep.
And there was a retraction printed in the paper. It was front page news when the allegations were first made. The retraction made page 12, bottom right-hand corner. It was a disgrace.
Yep.
But he was wrongly accused. But let's talk about your very famous dad. Did you feel when you were incarcerated? Did you feel as though you let him down?
No.
Tell me about how that. Tell me about how your incarceration affected your relationship with Gordon Piper.
My father. I had an excellent relationship with my father and my mother when she was alive. She died in 1981. I was living in Hawaii at the time, but I came back to nurse her because I was a nurse in intensive care. And I came back to nurse her for the last 2 months of her life. She was in a private hospital, but she used to come home every weekend to organise a funeral. She was only 44. Anyway, she passed in 1981, and my father married this woman who worked on a country practice as their equestrian person.
Oh, yeah.
Who married him just for money. Not that there was that much, but there was enough to marry him for. And my brother and I both couldn't stand him, couldn't stand her, could not stand her. And she pushed an estrangement between myself and my father.
Yeah.
So after 3 years of them being married, they broke up and she got the bulk of his estate, his whatever money, because he just wanted rid of her, right? I would say that was about 1987, 88. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
By 1991, when I got busted, we were just barely getting back together as a father and daughter. And I remember when he got busted, I found out from my grandmother. And my grandmother rang me and said, your father's been busted. And I said, what for, la, la, la. Then I rang Dad and he goes, well, my nickname's Bugs. And he goes, well, what do you want, Bugs? He goes, do you want the story? I said, no, just in case the Daily Mirror, The Sun, or Channel 9 or Channel 7 contact me, I just need to know what really happened. You know, I was really sarcastic. And it was around Mardi Gras time, big money for the Starlight Fund every year as one of the red ribbon ladies. Anyway, and he said I didn't do it. And my grandmother, who was my mother's mother, couldn't stand my father. I never could stand my father, just for their own reasons, you know. I mean, She was civil to him. My grandmother was the greatest woman that ever walked the planet. But she, for her own reasons, couldn't stand him. And when I rang her, she said he didn't do it.
And if your grandmother said he didn't do it, you knew he didn't do it. Because if there was any possibility that your grandmother thought he'd done it, she would have been into
100%.
it. But she said absolutely not. Your dad had diabetes and was...
Well, by the time he went to court, he was already a unilateral amputee. By the time he passed, he was a bilateral amputee below the knee. I mean, like, he had no sex drive whatsoever for at least 5 years before, or 4 years before, the charges were even laid. It was all about the mother. It was all about the mother who had the hots for him, and her kids went to his acting studio, which is called Fast Focus.
Is that near Penrith, I think?
Yeah. And so, you know, it was all that. It didn't affect our relationship. What affected our relationship was he told me that he was going to do Supreme Court bail for me, put a caveat on his house, right?
Yeah.
And he pulled it back. So I didn't get out. And I thought I had this grand plan in my head that if I got out for Supreme Court bail, then I would just run. You know what I mean? But I didn't get Supreme Court bail. I did my 2.5 years, and now, 34 years later, I look back on it like, oh, well, I'm glad I did that, because it just it really did straighten me out. Not that I was benched, but I straightened me out.
And if your dad had put his house up for your security, he could have lost his house.
Yeah, that's right.
You would have. So you're telling me you would have done a runner?
Yeah, I would have. Yeah.
Would you have gone back overseas to America, or would you have?
Probably. No, probably, because at the time I had 2 passports.
Right.
because things were totally different then. You could ring up the passport office and go, oh, I've lost my passport. And they'll go, okay, come down and get another one. So I had 2 passports.
Right, yeah.
It was like weird. Like, you know, it was like when I got the drugs, when I got the ketamine and the ecstasy through poste restante, like there was no checking of anything, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Weird.
So but just to explain that, that's a term people may not quite understand. So back in the day, before all the electronic devices and security checks they have today, if you lived overseas, you could send a package to Australia and someone else could go and pick it up for you.
That's right.
And use someone else's name so long as the name was the same as the name that was on the package. And you were receiving these drugs from the United States in macadamia jars.
That's right.
Yeah, we did discuss that. It's unbelievable. What did you learn from your time in prison?
I learned that the court and jail system in New South Wales, I don't know about any other state, needed a big kick up the arse. So let's go to court first, right?
Yes.
With court, I had a great lawyer and I had a great barrister. And in those days, there was a judge named Judge Joe Moore. And there used to be a saying,
Yep.
get more, get less.
Right.
So my lawyer and barrister chased his cycle, because they do a cycle, you know, they're at King Street, they're at Supreme Court, wherever. So they chased his cycle until my date came up, and then because I was going to King Street, and put off my case, my hearing, my sentencing, until we could get Judge Joe Moore. It's because we get more, we get less. Now,
Get more, get less.
If that's not corrupt, I don't know what is. And in jail, they just don't care. They put you in a cell, and that's it. You've got nothing. They don't tell you. I found a letter from my grandmother, the first letter she ever wrote me, about 3 months ago, in a suitcase that I was cleaning out my storage area. And she was saying, oh, they told me that I could send some money to you and that I have to ask to come out and all this kind of stuff. And she had sent me money in an envelope, and on the back of the envelope, in screw writing, it said, no money is to be brought into the jail. This has been put into your buy-up account. Well, tell that to the 78-year-old woman that rang you to ask you these questions, you know?
Yeah.
They just didn't care. Once you were in there, you were a number. You were what's called a MIN number, which is administration number. So it was your MIN number. And for the longest time, I remembered it. I don't remember it anymore. So you had a MIN number, and that's all you were. That's all you were. That and your last name.
I used to be friends with the then governor of Lithgow Jail,
right,
John O'Shea, and the governor. And I remember saying to him, how do you control a lifer, someone who's in for serious crimes, murder, and they know they're not going to get out of jail? How do you control them because they've got nothing to lose? And he said, no, they're actually the easiest because they know. He said, because I control their life.
It's not about them controlling anything. It's not, he's in his mind is doing the superiority thing, because the thing is, because they're in for life, or 20 years, say, which is life here, right? Because they're in for life, unless they're like the Kathleen Knights of the world or the Amanda Butterfields of the world, the ones that are really bad right now, right, who will never be rehabilitated, the normal lifers who have done, in inverted commas, a normal murder, right, they want their life in there as peaceful as possible. They want their wing to be gorgeously clean. It's their home. It's where they're going to be for the rest of their life until they move to minimum security. And then when they move to minimum security, their rooms are perfect. They're really good with a job. You know, they'll go out, come home. They don't want any shit.
Yeah.
It's not about the screws being in control of them. It's about them knowing their fate and going, okay, let's make the most of it. I don't know any lifer who doesn't have that attitude, because they want it to be as peaceful as possible. So if somebody, like in my day, a woman named Roseanne, whose last name is like pussy, she ended up getting a $2 million settlement from the government because she was wrongly convicted. She was thrown out of our wing because of her sexualization towards the screws, whether they be male or female. Whenever there was a muster, she'd stand there with her hands behind her back with all full makeup on at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they'd go, her last name, and go, here, and just this sexualization of a whole being. And so the lifers in this wing, which was a lifers wing, because nobody knew how long I was getting, the lifers said to the screws, you get rid of her out of our wing or she'll be dead tomorrow. That's how much they hated her. And I was in the cell next to her. I hated her.
Did you ever witness a murder in jail?
No.
No? A bashing?
Bashings, yeah, of course. There's bashings all the time.
What would you get bashed for? What's something that would...
Again, it goes back to Conlon. Again, you're not talking about the medium security or the minimum security. Although minimum security, they got a big mouthy because they were getting out soon. You know what I mean? But in maximum security in Conlon, there was a lot of fights because everybody was a junkie and they were all like, you know, I saw
highly
you,
wired.
you know, like they just thought that their crap didn't stink, you know what I mean? And so they'd fight with each other all the time over the most minuscule things about, that's my coffee, it's not your coffee, that's my milk, that's not your milk, all that kind of crap. And that's why if you're in Conlon for long enough, you will go crazy. These girls are so used to it, that's their wing. They never get any further than that because they're only ever in for, at the most, 3-month warrants, you know?
Prisoners who today put in protection are usually people who are either police informants or people who have harmed children, for example.
That's right.
How were those sort of prisoners treated in your experience?
We never saw them. I saw them. I saw them when they first came in because I was working in reception. But the segro, which is what it's called, segregation, was totally aside from the jail itself. At first it was right in the middle of it, but you couldn't see in it because the walls were 10 foot tall and nobody ever saw them. And if somebody was coming out of segro to go to reception for some reason, then that was in a lockdown situation. So everybody, if you were working, it was the middle of the day, you were working in the sewing room, you stayed in the sewing room. Working in the library, you stayed in the library. If you were in the wings, go back to the wings, right? You couldn't be out while they were being transferred from segro to wherever they were going.
When I had a walk through Lithgow Jail, they showed me an example of some of the weapons that the male prisoners, we're talking about male prisoners. Yeah. And I couldn't believe shivs, knives and things fashioned out of anything.
Yeah.
Did the women that you experienced make weapons?
No.
No. So are women prisoners in your experience not as violent as men?
They can be violent, but they're violent with their hands. They're not violent with knives or shivs or anything like that. They're not known for that. And you also have to understand that there's a time of the month, and this is a known fact health-wise, if you work with a lot of women, your cycle becomes part of their cycle. You just cycle together.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
Imagine 350 women.
All menstruating at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. So therefore, that's when everybody was on edge. You know, it was the PMS before it, you know.
Yeah.
But that's when the fights would happen. I don't know that I ever saw anybody with a knife. I think Kathy one time when that's the girl who was the bikie gang member, when she took over the pharmacy, which was the most hilarious thing in the world. When she took over the pharmacy, I think she had a knife then. But I think it was like, because we didn't have knives. You had forks and spoons, you know. And nobody was, like, angry enough like men get to want to shape something out of a toothbrush, you know. I mean, it wasn't that kind of anger. Men's anger is different to women's anger. Women's anger can be taken out with a fight, like a, you know.
One of the most popular television programs on telly at that time, obviously A Country Practice, but you also had on Network 10 Prisoner.
Yeah.
Which was set at Wentworth Detention Centre, a fictional women's jail. And that was on and very popular at the same time. Your dad was a star over on the 7 Network in A Country Practice. Was Wentworth Detention Centre, the TV show Prisoner, was it pretty close, or did it glorify it? Or how close was the TV show Prisoner?
I never worked in the laundry, so I don't know. But I do know that the type of talk that went on, and I never watched Prisoner.
Did you have a vinegar tits?
I what?
Oh, but I think it was Maggie Kirkpatrick's the
head one.
Yeah, Vinegar Tits was her nickname.
Well, we had Pat the Rat. That's Pat, who was in my unit, and she was head of the kitchen. And we used to get pepper, which was not allowed, because you could blow it into the screw's face, right? And we used to get lemons because you could make, and oranges because you could make a brew.
Alcohol. You could make alcohol.
Yeah, but not that we ever did. But we got all that stuff, and it's like through me we got lighters. You couldn't have lighters, but because I worked in reception, we got lighters, we got perfume, we got extra cigarettes, all that kind of stuff. We had the best greens. There was that kind of stuff going on. But so whatever Maggie Kirkpatrick played in Prisoner, that was Pat with us.
And it made a household name of people like Val Learman, who played B. Smith, and Colette Mann. God. Sheila Florence. It was groundbreaking TV, and I just wanted to ask you if it was close to the truth.
Well, I suppose in some ways it was, but because of the dramatisation of it, it seemed like to me every time I saw any short of it, and over the years I've seen shorts of it, they make it really angry all the time. Like everybody's angry.
I would be.
Well, sometimes you got to kind of chill out.
You have to.
Because your body's not going to handle it. That's number one. There's enough to be angry about without being angry at the people that you're in there with. So let's be angry about the screws. Let's be angry about the corruption in the court system. Let's be angry about the people that have put you there in the first place. Let's not be angry with each other, because that makes why are we even angry? We're both here together, you know?
I wanted to ask you about celebrity prisoners, because you were a bit of a celebrity because of your dad.
Yeah.
And I get that. But how do you think, for example, someone like Erin Patterson, the mushroom murder, how do you think, if she was in general population, how would she be treated, do you think?
She'll never get in general pop. There's no way. There's no way unless she requests it. There's no way she's going into Gen Pop. No way. That kind of crime, that's as bad as a child crime, what she did. And apparently I've heard that she's trying to make friends with all these people and cook stuff.
They were allowing her in the kitchen.
Who does that? You know what I mean?
I couldn't believe it when I heard they allowed her to work in the kitchen.
I know. I'm
Christ.
Really? And then there was another girl, and I saw it, and I don't know what jail she's in. Oh, Dilwinia. She's in Dilwinia. I had a thing on TikTok about it. The Italian girl who beheaded a mother and went to the next door neighbours, and they're letting her out. They're thinking of letting her out. But she'd beheaded her mother and took the head to the next door neighbours. Well, she's been trying to scalp people because she's in general population. And I was saying on TikTok, why you got these people who are so out there? She should be in, like, we used to have a wing called Rose Scott, which was closed down by the United Nations because of the conditions, which was the mentally unstable wing, right? She should be in a wing like that. But our Rose Scott was so bad that they closed it down. That's how bad it was.
You're referring to Jessica Camilleri.
Is it? That's her name?
Yeah, she was found guilty of the manslaughter of her mother, Rita, back in 2019. She stabbed her mother more than 100 times and then decapitated her, as you said, and she carried the head
to the next door neighbours
onto the street and dropped it in her neighbour's front yard. It's frightening stuff, isn't it?
Well, she tried to scalp somebody about a couple of weeks ago. This Asian girl, you don't see her face, but she's got really nice long, brunette hair, Asian hair, and she tried to scalp her. I'm like, what is this woman even doing near people?
I don't know.
It's only 2019. That's only 6 years. You've only been in jail 6 years. In my day, you did that kind of crime, you were in Segro for 10. You weren't around people at all.
I know this and you know this, but contraband is rife in all our prisons, no matter what the security. Maybe not Goulburn, Supermax, I don't know. But back when you were in prison, was there much contraband, and how did it get in?
Well, contraband got in through me a lot of times.
Oh, really? What happened? Tell me about that.
Well, because I worked in reception. So we couldn't have perfume, and we couldn't have lighters, and we couldn't have, I don't know, what else would they bring in? Pens, because what happened is a lot of them were, say, South American mules, right? And they'd come in with their suitcases, and those suitcases were going to be in there for 20 years. And what Leanne, who was the other girl, and I used to do, our job was to go through the suitcase and tick off everything that was in there, And with the junkies, we would get pinpricked by their needles, whereas with the South American mules, we would get new perfumes or cartons of cigarettes or lighters, stuff like that. And so over a period of time, obviously not when they first walked in the door, but once they were charged and weren't getting bail, Leanne and I would go back to their suitcases, and we had hundreds of suitcases and bags in this area of reception, and we'd go back to the ones that had that stuff in it and take out, say they had 2 perfumes, we'd take out 1 perfume, or we'd take out a half a packet, like the carton, a half a carton of cigarettes, stuff them down our bra and take them back down to the wing. It's just how it got in.
What about drugs?
No, I didn't. The only way that drugs got in that I knew of was when my father came in for visits and everybody was kissing everybody. But drugs got in all the time, like all the time through visits.
So it was a visitor that would bring it in?
Bring them in, yeah. And the screws are just so, bored, they're just there for the money. They're not there for the protection of anybody. They're quite easily done.
And where there's a will, there's a way. And as John O'Shea told me at Lithgow Jail, he said these prisoners have nothing but time.
Yeah, to figure out ways.
To think, to figure out ways. And where there's a will, there's a way.
That's right. Exactly right. It's like now it just amazes me that they've got mobile phones. I'm like, how are you getting a mobile phone in
How do you get a mobile phone into a jail?
I have no clue. But that's rife. That's really rife. I have a friend whose ex-husband is in jail in Lebanon for 6 years. Long story, idiot. Went back to Lebanon to a warrant that wanted him to be arrested because he was the guy who was going to be shot. They tried to shoot him at Kirribilli and missed when they shot at a car about a year and a half ago. Anyway, he got 2 months and then got out, and then they charged him with something else and he got 6 years. But he calls his son all the time on his mobile phone. Like, Seriously.
I've been in as part of media into 3 jails, AMC in Canberra, Bathurst and Lithgow, and particularly Lithgow and AMC, which is a fairly modern jail. We had to go through metal detectors, X-ray machines, kind of like at the airport,
Yeah.
a physical frisk and sniffer dogs.
Yeah. No, none of that.
And I say to myself, how does contraband get in? Jesus.
Yeah, we had none of that. You walked through, and if you were going to see... So my grandmother would never get checked with that kind of stuff, neither would my father. But if you were going to see somebody who was a known drug addict or something like that, you went through a much more strict...
processing, yeah.
They just had pat downs. They didn't have, the things you walk, like the TSA you walk through and all that kind of stuff. We never had that.
Yeah, the times have changed. And yet, maybe in some regards, they haven't. How do you feel as an advocate for women in prison? How do you feel things are today?
Well, from what I hear, it hasn't really changed that much. I mean, because until you educate the screws on the fact that there are people in there who actually won't reoffend and stop treating them like children, like the way that now, although up here I find it very frustrating, but I can see the new recruits of the police talking, because they put all the new recruits up here, right, to give them like the bad experience first. I see the new recruits trying to talk to the junkies, trying to talk to the homeless people. This whole new kind of policing is going on. There's still the old way of policing, which is catching crooks, but the people who are walking around are actually trying to communicate with these people whose lives are the street, right? If they would do the same thing with the screws, there could be a change of mentality. But until you get through to screws who have a very low mentality, it's not going to happen.
Kerrin, tell me about the day you were released and your special song.
My special song was Everybody's Free to Feel Good by, I want to say Rosella. I think it is Rosella. But it was a song of the time, and I had a $700 Callous and Patty suit on. I was picked up in a limousine, and a screw. About a week before, I was telling her what I hated this screw. I was telling her what I was going to wear and everything, and I had this hat or something like that. And she said, oh no, I was being picked up in a limousine. And she said, yeah, we had one girl here who was picked up in a limousine once before. And she said, but she had class. And I said, what, unlike you? And just left it at that.
Wow.
Just to the last minute, they'll just try to put it down.
Everybody's free to feel good. You're quite correct. It was Rosella.
Yeah.
She was born in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. I knew she was black. I didn't know she was black.
I don't know if for copyright Kelsey's allowed to insert that song, but if we're not allowed to, have a listen to it. Everybody's Free to Feel Good by Rosella, spelled Rozalla.
Yeah.
And it was released, gee whiz, 1991. So it was released while you were in jail.
That's right. And then I just made a tape of it and put it on. I taped the same song like 20 times till the
you put on loop.
Yeah. And because in those days you put it in the tape in the thing.
Yeah, the cassette machine.
Yeah. See
the millennials and people younger than that today, Kerrin, won't understand the importance of a pencil and the winding of the...
No, they don't.
No idea.
No idea.
Tell me, when you were released and you've listened to your song on loop, what was your first meal?
My first meal was actually at the Foresters restaurant, where I ended up managing not long after because a friend of mine was the licensee.
Where's that?
The corner of Riley and Favreau Street in Surrey Hills.
Surrey Hills, all right.
So my first meal was with 20 other people, friends, who came, and John and Vinny, who I'm still friends with today. Whatever, we had a choice, you know.
What did you have?
I can't remember.
Oh, you're kidding.
Because I got too drunk. But what I do remember is we went from the jail, we went to Key West Apartments.
Yeah, down at Circular Quay.
Yeah, we'd rented a 2-bedroom apartment. Mark and Paul, a gay couple that came out with Chris, my husband, to pick me up. We stayed at the Key West Apartments overlooking the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. And then when we went from there, we went to the Foresters. Well, then we came home, everybody went home, we came home, went to bed, and I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and this is what I remember. And I made myself a double Cointreau on the rocks, and I sat looking at the sunrise, crying my eyes out, because I remember thinking it's done. It doesn't matter about the parole's nothing, but this is done. I don't have to deal with those people anymore. I don't have to deal with the politics. I don't have to deal with screws. I don't have to deal with anything.
Right.
I just have to get on with life. And I cried my eyes out for about an hour.
Tell me, did you stop dealing?
No.
You're on parole and you're still dealing?
Yes.
Jesus, yeah. Kerrin.
I know.
Weren't you afraid that the police were watching you with a hawk eye?
No, not really. Again, you think that you're not going to get caught. That you're going to, you've got it.
But you were caught.
Yes,
but you were caught.
I know that. But once you're caught, then you learn things, right? You learn different things. But I only dealt, once I got out, I only dealt for probably 6 months, maybe a year, you know, and a totally different system, totally different way of doing things. Ed was deported, so there was no ecstasy coming in, right? So I was dealing a different drug. And I just kind of got over it. You know what I mean? It was just like I knew the risks I was taking again, and that something would happen again if I didn't stop. And so I just stopped, and I never kind of went back to doing it. But I did, you know, you think you know everything when you first get out. I must say that when I first got out, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like I got out and went, okay, now let's start doing it. It was like 6 months later or something like that an offer came up that I couldn't refuse. So I did it for about 6 months, and then I just went, no, that's enough. I've done it. And I went on to doing what I do now.
What industry is that? Tell us more about what you're doing now.
Well, I'm retired now, but what I was in and what I still have a hand in with social media is the sex industry. So I was in the sex industry working as a sex worker in the bondage and discipline area for a long time. And now, not now, but my last job, physical job, I was a receptionist in either a massage parlour or a brothel. I went from one to the other, but I always stayed a long time in one job.
We can go on to that chapter in your life on another chat.
We can.